Welcome to the new Chart Renderers Pro SDK session. My name is Uma Harano and I'm a member of the ArcGIS Pro SDK team. Here is a session overview. I'm going to begin by first defining a renderer in ArcGIS Pro. I will then walk through the process of creating a renderer programmatically using ArcGIS Pro SDK. We will then get into the nuts and bolts of the new chart renderers available in ArcGIS Pro, the bar chart, stack chart, and the pie chart renderers. Data contained in a feature layer can be visualized in ArcGIS Pro using symbols. Renderers are objects in Pro that store the attributes and the symbolization used to visualize the feature layer. Renderers use the stored symbolization to draw the feature layer on a map. ArcGIS Pro has many renderers: single symbol renderer, unique value renderer, chart renderer, to just name a few. I've also included some screenshots of renderers on this slide over here. Charts can be used to symbolize multiple attributes in your feature layer. This allows you to show quantitative differences between the attributes. For example, you can use the pie chart symbol to represent the ethnicity of a district in a city. Each section of the pie chart comprises one of the ethnicities. Chart symbols can be used with point, line, or polygon features. ArcGIS Pro supports three types of chart renderers: bar chart renderer, stacked chart renderer, and the pie chart renderer. Chart symbology is the most effective to visualize when there are no more than 30 features in a 2D map. Drawing of chart symbols is not supported in local and global scenes. Before we get into creating chart renderers programmatically, I want to show you the 3 steps used to create any type of advanced renderers using the Pro SDK. First, a renderer definition object should be created using the constructor. The renderer definition object defines the symbology to use, the fields in the data to symbolize, etc. Pro SDK exposes many derived types of renderers. This session will focus on 3 types: the bar chart render definition, stack chart render definition, and the pie chart render definition. The screenshot here on the right is from the Pro API reference guide. It shows you the many more derived renderer definition objects available. Once you have the render definition object created, you can create a renderer using the create renderer method on the feature layer. This will return a sim renderer object. Last step, we apply the sim renderer to the feature layer using the set renderer method on the feature layer object. This method requires the sim renderer object as a parameter. Now let us investigate the details of creating the chart renders programmatically. A bar chart renderer symbolizes each attribute on the feature layer with a vertical or a horizontal bar. A screenshot on the right here shows you an example of a bar chart renderer. First, we create a bar chart renderer definition using the constructor. In the constructor, set the various properties to configure the renderer definition. The chart fields property is one of the main things to configure. This is a string array where you lift the field names in the feature layer to visualize in the bar chart. Color ramp property defines the colors to use to symbolize the bars in the chart. The render definition object exposes a few more properties to configure the chart symbols. Here is a code snippet in the slide. I'm first defining the string array with the fields to use in the chart renderer. This is the chart fields variable. Here I create the bar chart render definition object using the constructor. I set the properties needed inside the constructor. I've listed some of the important properties in the code snippet. The chart fields property is set to the array of strings with the field names. The orientation property defines if the bars need to be vertical or horizontal. Then the color ramp property is another important one. This is where you set the ArcGIS Pro color ramp style to use for your bar chart renderer. The next step is to create a renderer. I'm using the create renderer method on the feature layer. I'm passing in the bar chart renderer definition as a parameter. This method will return a sim chart renderer. Notice how I'm casting it here. The last step in the code snippet, I apply the sim chart renderer to the feature layer using the set renderer method. This is where I pass in the sim chart renderer as a parameter. This will now render the feature layer with the bar chart renderer just as seen in the screenshot in this slide. The stack chart renderer stacks each feature attribute on a single bar. This type of renderer uses the stacked chart render definition object. The concept of creating this renderer is very similar to the bar chart renderer. Let us walk through the code snippet here. I first create the string array chart fields to hold the field names in the feature layer that I want to symbolize. Here I create the stacked chart render definition object using the constructor. Within the constructor, I define the properties used for the renderer. The properties I'm defining here are the chart fields set to the array of strings with the field names. The orientation property defines the stacked bars orientation, vertical or horizontal. And the color ramp property points to the color ramp style item to use for the chart. I create the sim chart renderer using the create render method on the feature layer. I'm passing in the stacked chart render definition object that I just created. This will return the sim chart render object. I then apply this sim chart render to the feature layer using the set render method on the feature layer. This will render the feature layer with the stacked chart just as we can see in the screenshot over here. A pie chart renderer symbolizes each feature attribute as a section of a pie chart. A pie chart renderer is used to configure the pie chart renderer. The process is very similar to the two chart renderers we just saw. Let us step through the code snippet in this slide for the pie chart renderer. I first create the array of strings to hold the fields to depict in my pie chart renderer. And just like before, I'm creating the pie chart renderer definition object. The chart fields and the color ramp properties are specified just as we did in the previous renderers. For a pie chart, you can configure the orientation of the slices using the orientation property. You can set it to go clockwise or counterclockwise. This is how the pie chart will display the list of attributes. Then I create the sim chart renderer using the create render method on the feature layer. I'm passing in the pie chart renderer definition that I just configured. I then apply the sim chart renderer to the feature layer using the set renderer method, and I pass in my pie chart renderer as a parameter. So now in Pro, the feature layer will now be rendered with the chart symbols as seen in the screenshot over here. I want to now show you a demo where I create these renderers using a Visual Studio add-in. I have a simple ArcGIS Pro project open. The map on the screen has a US demographics feature layer. Here is the attribute table for this layer. This data has population data for various demographics per state. I want to symbolize this feature layer with the ethnic population data for each state. I want to use the new chart renderers for this. It'll give a clear visualization of the population demographics for each state. In this chart renderer custom tab, I have created buttons for the three chart renderers. I've used an ArcGIS Pro add-in to create this. I'm first going to show you how to create the renderer for the US demographics layer with a bar chart renderer. I'm going to click the bar chart button and step through the code behind using Visual Studio. Here is the breakpoint. I'm first retrieving the US demographics feature layer from the active map. Next, within the context of the queue task, I'm going to configure my bar chart renderer definition object. I first define the array of fields in the layer I want to use. For this demo, I'm going to use the 4 fields that you see listed over here, and I'm going to store that in the chart fields variable. Next, I need to get a color ramp style item from Pro. I first get the color brewer schemes style project item in the current project. Within the style project item, I search for the red blue classes 4 style, and I store it in this color ramp variable. Now I create the bar chart renderer definition object using the constructor. Within the constructor, I set the chart fields property to the string array variable that I have defined. I set the orientation property to be vertical. I want my bar chart to display vertical bars. And then I set the color ramp property to the red blue ramp that I retrieved from Pro style project items. I also set other bar chart properties such as the bar dimensions, width, length, and spacing, etc. Here I call the create renderer method on the feature layer, and then I pass in the bar chart renderer definition object that I just configured. This will return a sim renderer. Notice how I cast this to a sim chart renderer derived object, and I'm storing it in the bar chart renderer variable. I want my bar chart displayed against a specific background, so I'm accessing the bar chart's base symbol property, and I'm setting it to a nice green color. I'm also normalizing the bar chart for display purposes. And here's the final step. I am applying this new bar chart renderer to my feature layer using the set renderer method. Notice how I'm passing in the bar chart renderer as a parameter. I'm going to continue and see the result in Pro. Notice that each state is now rendered with a bar chart. There are 4 bars displayed in each state, corresponding to the 4 fields that we specified in the chart fields array in code. Each bar denotes an ethnic population group in that state. Notice this green background color applied to the state. This allows you to visualize the bar chart symbol with a nice uniform canvas. Now let us use a stacked chart renderer to visualize the demographics for each state. A stacked chart renderer stacks each attribute in a single bar. I'm going to step through the code by clicking the stacked chart button on the ribbon. I get the US demographics layer from the active map. Again, within the context of the queued task, I set up the various variables required for my stack chart renderer definition. So here is the color ramp variable that I set. I set it to the same red blue classes 4 ramp. I retrieve it from the color brewer scheme style project item just like before. Now I create the chart fields string array. It holds the same 4 attributes from my feature layer that I want to symbolize on. I now create the stacked chart renderer definition object using the constructor. I set the chart fields property to the string array holding the 4 attributes. Then I set the color ramp to the red blue classes 4 ramp that I have selected. Here the orientation is set to vertical. I want my stacked bar to be vertical in the map view. And just like before, here are some of the additional properties to define the bar width, height, etc. So the size option here is new. It can be configured to be fixed size or the sum of 4 selected fields. I have picked fixed size over here. Next, I call the create renderer method on the feature layer. I pass in the stacked chart renderer definition object that I just configured. This method returns a sim renderer. Again, I cast it to the sim chart renderer and I store it in this variable, stacked bar chart renderer variable. So just as we did in the bar chart, I configured a green background color here to visualize the chart symbols, and I have also normalized the renderer for display purposes. Here is my final step. I call the set renderer method on the feature layer, and I pass in the sim chart renderer as the parameter. This applies the stacked chart renderer to the feature layer. I hit continue and see the result in Pro. Notice the stacked chart renderer applied to the US demographics feature layer. There is 1 bar displayed in each state. It has 4 segments. Each bar has 4 segments denoting each field that I defined in the renderer definition chart fields property. Notice the green background color applied to the state. This allows you to visualize the bar chart symbol with a nice uniform canvas. So the next step is the pie chart renderer. I'm going to click the pie chart button on the ribbon. Let's step through the code. The pattern, as you can see, is exactly the same as the previous two. I retrieve the US demographics layer. And next, within the context of the queue task, here I'm defining the pie chart renderer definition object. Here are all the properties that I define. The chart fields color ramp. I'm setting the orientation to be counterclockwise. Like the stacked chart, the size option can be set to fixed or sum of all the 4 fields. I create the sim chart renderer using the create renderer method on the feature layer, and I pass in my pie chart renderer definition. I set the visualization properties for the background, and I normalize the renderer to the population field. And final step, I apply my new pie chart renderer to the feature layer using the set renderer method. So back in Pro, notice the pie chart with 4 slices placed as symbols in each state. Each slice denotes a specific ethnic group in that state. This brings us to the end of our new chart renderers session. One more thing that I want to mention is the code and the data that I've used for this session are all available in GitHub. This QR code that you see will give you the link to access the data, PowerPoint, and the code. Thank you.